Good morning to you all, to the President of Imani, to EPA, to all government agencies and development partners gathered here this morning. I think it's crucial that we continue our discussion as my brother, the MC, indicated. Ghana is racing against time on its commitment to the intended nationally determined contributions. To address this climate crisis, Ghana is expected to raise $6.3 billion US. This is about 82 billion Ghana cedi by 2030 from the domestic financial markets, corporations to complement international climate financing sources to implement the updated 34 mitigation and adoption mechanisms submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on the climate change, and then also to demonstrate its commitment to the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. Now, government intends to raise $3.7 billion US, 1.7 billion from the commercial market and the corporate social responsibility respectively, and then also to commit 1.4 billion of the nation's budget to the domestic financing needs. Now, we all know, and judging from the current fiscal crisis in the country and the lack of readiness of the domestic private financial market and corporation to raise the needed finance, as well as the nation's ability to tap into external climate finance, leaves us to ask more questions than answers. Just a brief on our oil and gas investment of 14.2 billion. The actual climate financing inflow to Ghana from 2011 to 2019 was 1.3 billion. Grants and loans constituted about 91.1% of the total climate finance inflows for the period. Now, the contribution of the private sector and private foundations was 1.43%. This indicates a low domestic contribution to the climate financing inflows. Factors like the escalating public debt, low government revenue mobilization, and changing priorities of donors due to the pandemic and global crisis have rendered the national budget support, grants and loans least reliable alternatives in the long run. In 2019, the government established the SDG Delivery and Green Funds to raise capital to support the implementation of the INDCs. The government expects that private sector will contribute about $100 million US in SDG Delivery Fund and $200 million US in the Green Funds to complement the stateside effort to address the financing gap. Also, the green bonds and carbon pricing are options government intends to integrate in the private sector in the implementation of the climate mitigation. With the introduction of 3 new taxes that were recently passed and subsequently assented by the President of the Republic of Ghana, the question is, will private sector be able to commit as expected? To this, Imani Ghana seeks to undertake an assessment of Ghana's readiness to finance the INDCs under the current fiscal crisis. We have a firm belief that effective implementation of the INDCs could have a catalytic effect on job creation, community resilience, which will in effect help minimize poverty. The climate crisis poses a more severe socioeconomic threat if Ghana continues its current emission of 42.2 mtCO2e in 2016, using a business as usual scenario. Ghana's emission is likely to increase to about 73.95 mtCO2e by 2030. The high temperatures associated with the climate crisis will have a negative impact on agricultural productivity and threatens food security, since only 2% of arable lands has been irrigated. Additionally, the climate crisis will cause significant shock to Ghana's energy supply, since about 30% of electricity is sourced from hydropower. Implementing the mitigation and adoption measures remains Ghana's surest bet to address the threats of the climate crisis. However, the institutional coordination and oversight, as well as the financial flow required to accelerate technology and capacity building, remains very, very weak. Also, accountability by CSOs and other demand-side actors have been low. We intend to align the INDCs to the industrial policies of Ghana to establish the socio-economic benefits and critically gauge the readiness of domestic and external finance market to support the implementation of Ghana's climate mitigation adoption strategies. Now, the real challenge. From 2022 to 2030, Ghana must raise 22.6 billion in investment to finance the updated 34 mitigation and adoption measures to address the effects of climate change and contribute to low carbon emission. However, there is little or no evidence about Ghana's readiness to finance the domestic and external, the INDCs. More seriously is the current fiscal crisis the country is facing. Between 2011 and 2019, actual climate change investment, excluding oil and gas investment, was about $1.3 billion US. Almost 92% of the 1.3 billion were sourced from grants and loans, as indicated earlier, and less than 3% from the private sector foundation and technical corporations. This significant climate finance deficit in Ghana, and apart from the threats of the climate crisis, i.e. drought, food insecurity, and energy insecurity, Ghana can potentially miss the SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, as well as SDG 12, climate action. If the country fails to raise the requisite investment from now to 2030, there are dire consequences. In conclusion, we at Imani are optimistic that our meeting today will spark the talking points that will help us do the following: analyze Ghana's readiness to attract climate financing under the current fiscal crisis. Analyze Ghana's readiness to attract climate financing from domestic and external private financial markets. Increase government's awareness and focus on the feasibility of the financing targets of the INDCs and available financing options. And then finally, increase the awareness and focus of civil society organizations to government's commitment to the INDCs to enhance accountability. I welcome all of you here this morning. Let's all participate and participate well, and make sure that we gauge and help government achieve these targets. Thank you for your attention.
It's just to tell a little story or narrative as to where we are in terms of the attracting climate-related financing as a country, but it's important to situate this in the broader context of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. The last week I was involved in other conversations and deliberations where, again, from the side of government, you see a renewed push, an attempt to actually get the financing that is required. And I see a few of my friends that I interacted with. I see Right? Yes. On here. So it's great to be here, and then it's great to talk through these set of issues here. So please forgive me. I will be bombarding you with a lot of statistics and numbers, but again, it helps us to situate things in the right context. So it's just, like I said, to talk a little bit about what's happening in an African context, and then whittle it down to the Ghanaian context, and open then the floor up for broader reflections on what do we do going forward. As the earlier speakers and Prof have already mentioned, we're in an economic crisis, and the financing flows that are required by the government for its main budget are not coming as we would expect. We're still negotiating with the IMF for $3 billion or so to support our economy. And then globally as well, there are a lot of headwinds in terms of the inflation that we're seeing. We're seeing central banks hike up policy rates. We're seeing multilateral institutions not committing as much resources as one would expect to support the climate, agenda.
How some of these monies are coming in, if indeed they are coming in. Because Doc again also mentioned that we have fiscal crisis as a country, and everybody can see that. We are also running to IMF for $3 billion, yet we are looking for $1.4 billion every year to finance climate change. Are we ready for this? Can we afford this? We are slapping the private sector with a lot of taxes, 3 taxes more, yet we want to encourage them to be able to contribute. So far they are doing just about 2.8%. Doc says that he wants to see them do about 18%. How do we encourage the private sector to also contribute? Again, we want to create awareness among government, we want to create awareness among civil society. How do we do all of these things? These are the things that are going to be on the table for the next hour or 2 or so. I will not be able to allow everybody mention their names here because we have quite a large number today compared to what we had the last time. However, I will attempt to, acknowledge the institutions that are present, and then I will introduce also the panel that will start the conversation. But as a matter of fact, all of us are going to engage in this particular subject. We have in our midst, and I would love that at the end of the day we put our hands together for them for the good job that they've done as far as this program is concerned. Oxfam is with us, Energy Commission is here, the US Embassy is here, Canada High Commission is here, Cocoa Board is here, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, the European Union Development Bank Ghana is here, also representatives from the Daily Guide, that's from the media, Metro Television, Daily Graphic, Ghanaian Times, Oman FM, TV Africa, Class FM, and News Ghana. Other representations are from Environmental Protection Agency, the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, Ghana Climate Innovation Center, expecting, okay, we already have Foster, so the Ministry of Finance is seated also, and Foster took a lot of blows the last time. I'm sure that today will even be worse. The way Doc has started punching, even from the pulpit, that's another matter. Also have representatives from Mali Embassy, the British High Commission, the United Nations Development Program, that's the UNDP, and CDD Ghana. Let's put our hands together for everybody, please. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have 4 institutions represented by very distinguished individuals to start the line of conversations that we all want to have today, and hopefully have answers to everything that Doc raised, Dr. Jampong and Dr. Boateng have raised here, plus many more that would come from some of you as well. From Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology and Innovation, if you can introduce yourselves there.